Happy Friday, everyone. I hope you've had a great week. I'm Robin, and up until recently, I thought that these two experiments right here were complete failures, and I forgot about them for about a year. I recently revisited them, and as it turns out, they weren't failures, they just needed time. So let's talk about that. So let's take a couple steps back here. I am a huge fan of peated malts. I love very peaty scotches. And so of course, I wanted to make a peated malt. So at the end of January of last year, 2021, I, on a whim, bought a bag of peated Simpson's malt. Now, if you don't know what peat is, if you've never had a peaty whiskey before, peat is degraded moss and shrubs and sometimes seaweed, depending on your location, that used to be used as a form of heat or fuel in Scotland and Ireland way back in the day. I'm talking pre-industrial revolution. And when you burn this, it gives lots of smoky flavors. And in the barley malting process, when they use peat moss as the way to dry the barley, these smoky flavors stick to the barley and it makes it through the entire whiskey making process. And that's why peated scotches taste really smoky. So I had purchased this peated malt and mashed it and distilled it. And during the distillation process, this is where you kind of have to struggle to figure out where you take your distillation cuts. If you've ever made a peated malt before or looked into how they take their distillation cuts in Scotland, the peaty notes come towards the end of the distillation. They come towards the tails. So if you want a super smoky whiskey, you're gonna have to keep more of those tails than if you would want a lighter, fruitier, more floral forward whiskey. So this is what I was dealing with. How much of those phenolic flavors can I keep without keeping too much of those tails flavors? Again, if you've never distilled before, these tails flavors for whiskey can taste like wet dog, wet cardboard. I think it tastes a lot like gross pasta water. And so you're playing with that, right? You're struggling with that balance of making sure you don't have too many of those gross, grungy tail flavors, but you have enough of those smoky phenolic notes that you want to get. Anyways, during the spirit run of the distillation, right, the second distillation that I did, I ended up taking a decently large heads cut. I didn't want those nail polishy notes. I didn't want those super floral notes. I wanted to keep more of the peaty flavors. This also meant that I kept a little bit more of the tails than I might for, say, a brandy. So what I ended up with after the spirits run was 1,400 milliliters of spirit at 62% ABV. I added some water to bring that up to 1,500 milliliters, which according to my refractometer put it at 56%. It might be a little bit more than that according to calculations I was doing, and I have not checked the ABV since, so yeah. I then split that 1,500 milliliters into 2 jars, and they're both oak infused differently. The lighter one right here got a piece of toasted American oak that had previously been used to oak infuse some rum. And this dark one right here got a piece of charred French oak that had previously been used to oak infuse some funky high ester Jamaican rum. In summary, same distillate, same peated malt, same ABV and everything, just 2 different types of oak. For those of you that are super nerdy and want to know all the details, stay tuned to the end of the video because I will tell you exactly what the specs were for the fermentation and both distillations. Now, I let these experiments oak infuse for about 2 months, and after I had tasted them, I was really upset with myself because I was getting some of those noodly flavors. I was getting almost burnt noodles and wasn't getting those peaty phenolic flavors that I wanted. I wanted more campfire and mesquite barbecue and a little bit of a brininess. Yeah, but I was getting a lot of burnt wet noodles. So on April 23rd, I had written down probably should redistill. So these had been sorted in my brain as something that I will revisit later. I'll redistill them because I didn't take the distillation cuts properly. Now, fast forward about a year, and I was reorganizing all of my experiments and decided to crack these open and revisit them. And to my surprise, they had completely transformed. That noodliness was gone. So let's taste them. We will start with the one that got the toasted American oak. Now this is much lighter in color, as you can see. It's like a light golden color. So because the toasted American oak had previously been used to oak infuse rum, a lot of those polyphenols, a lot of that color was already pre-stripped out from the rum. So there's definitely some nice smokiness in here, but first what I'm getting is some citrus. There's some lemon and a little bit of key lime. The smokiness is like a sweet peatiness. There's honey and mesquite barbecue. So that mesquite barbecue is probably that sweet peatiness that I'm getting. There's some fresh tires as well. And something a little bit vegetal. It's like a forest floor, but a dry forest floor. So for me, this is just a little bit hot for 56% ABV. Again, it might be a little bit higher. I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, I think it's a little bit hot. Now, sometimes those phenols can express themselves as heat, but ultimately, if your spirit is hot, give it more time. But as soon as the sip is in my mouth, I get some nice fruitiness. I get some figs and some golden raisins. It has a lovely creamy mouthfeel, and there's some great roastiness. There's some roasted nuts and like cashews. I'm getting vanilla and a little bit of beeswax. And there's definitely some cinnamon bark and some oaky spiciness. Much better than burnt noodles. Now let's compare that to the peated malt that got oak infused with charred French oak that had previously oak infused some high ester Jamaican rum. That's a mouthful. Okay, so as I said before, definitely a lot more color. There's like a burnt caramel, almost burgundy color to this. And on the nose, there's a lot more fruit and spice, which is quintessential for French oak. There's some salted caramel. That's like creme brulee territory. There's some allspice and star anise. The peat isn't as upfront in this one, so I'm not getting that mesquite barbecue so much. But there is still a sweet smokiness to it. Almost like fresh tires that are covered in caramel. There's like a rich orange thing and a little bit of a mustiness, and this would be more like a wet forest floor. This one also has a little bit too much heat for me, but it does have a nice silky mouthfeel. A lot of those fruits and spices come forward right away. I'm really not getting a lot of the peat at all, but it is just mostly right off the bat, dried fruits. We've got dates and prunes, and then those spices are like clove and star anise again. There's definitely some chocolatiness. There's some bitter chocolate and some malted chocolate like Whoppers, and the finish is a little bit dry. Again, that's pretty common for French oak. So this one also tastes a lot better than it did. There's none of that burnt noodle thing, so I'm not getting just like, oh shit, I kept too much of the tails. Like I'm not getting any of those flavors, which is really exciting to me. So the big take home here is that even if you are force aging your spirits or oak infusing your spirits like I am, sometimes they just need time. Sometimes they just need to be left alone. I left them on the back burner, and I'm really, really glad I did. Let's combine the two and taste the combination. Let's taste the blend. So here I've got a 50-50 blend, and you can see the color sits somewhere right in the middle. That's a beautiful caramel color. And the nose is fruity and has honey and caramel and a little bit of a floral thing. There's some orange juice and a little waxiness. There's some cinnamon pine cones. There's some pecan pie filling, a little bit of pine, and a little bit of that tire thing is still there, but it's not super upfront. So this also has a silky mouthfeel, and it has a great combination of both flavor profiles, which sounds pretty obvious, right? But I am getting still that spiciness, that fruitiness, that chocolatiness coming forward from the French oak infused peated malt. However, it's much more subdued, and I'm now actually getting some of those peaty flavors coming forward. So that's really nice, and I definitely want to combine these. So I'm actually going to combine them. Let's do this right here. I don't think that this is done being oak infused. I think it could use a little bit more time. Like I said, there's heat across the board, and I just want that to kind of mellow out. So I'm actually going to, let's go ahead and I'm going to combine these together and let them marry for a little bit. I'm going to leave the French oak out of the mix and just keep that piece of American oak in here, because I don't want the French oak. Hey, Jar. Ah! You want to grab me tongs? I gotta get that out.
Tongs?
Tongs. Yeah. I don't want the French oak to overpower this marriage here. Thanks. Bye, Lou. Okay, so yeah, this definitely took on a nice dark, there's a nice red color to this. Oh, I'm so excited. So I'm just gonna let this sit and see what time does. And hopefully that heat mellows out a little bit. If not, I'll try adding some water and seeing how diluting that down really plays with the heat profile and the flavor profile. Before I go, I want to say a huge shout out to the Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel. I really appreciate you guys. And if you, the viewer, are not yet a Patreon but would like to support the channel, I've got a link in the description below and you can join us over there and join our community. I just realized that this is the first whiskey experiment that I have talked about on YouTube. So if you guys enjoyed this video and want me to do more whiskey experiments, give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do more whiskey experiments. Make sure to share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel and everything like that. Okay, so for you nerds, I started this experiment. I did the mash on January 31st, 2021, and I had 10 pounds of the Simpson's peated malt with 5 gallons of water. I brought that to 155 and left it there for probably an hour. I let it mash for probably about an hour. I was stirring every 15 minutes, checking on it, tasting it, waiting for it to taste sweet, etc. The starting specific gravity was 1.060, and I used good old Distillers yeast for the fermentation. I let that ferment for a couple of weeks, and the final specific gravity was 1.001, so almost completely dry. That would put the 5 gallons of beer or wash at 7.7% ABV. When I tasted that Distillers beer, I wrote, tastes like miso soup with a spritz of lemon. So I have since been calling this experiment miso Peaty. I think it's funny. Anyways, after the first distillation, I collected 4,350 milliliters of low wines at 32% ABV. I then distilled that a second time, and during the high wines distillation or the spirits run, I collected 1,400 milliliters at 62% ABV. I tossed out the first 220 milliliters that came off the still and then collected heads, but I ended up getting rid of the first 180 milliliters of heads and then kept the next 1,400 milliliters. As I mentioned, I added some water to bring that up to 1,500 milliliters, which brought the proof down to about 56%, maybe a little bit more, but yeah. And I split it into 2 jars and tossed in 2 different types of oak. I tossed in a toasted American oak that had previously been used to oak infuse some rum, and I tossed in a charred French oak that had previously been used to oak infuse some high ester Jamaican rum, Wray and Nephew to be specific, if anyone's interested. So these experiments have been oak infused since March 1st of 2021. If you have any specific questions about this experiment, let me know in the comments. I started this experiment. Oh, bye, Lou. So both of them have, oh, she's back. Give this a thumbs up. Hi. Great, 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 great.